Okay, so everyone, welcome back. This is our last in our series on the stranger, and I had fun with the title because we said we were saving Shabbat and the Ten Commandments and the Ger and Shabbat, and I call it a Goysha Shabbat or Gersha Shabbat, and it's a great argument Parshanim. It's a short little share on Parshanut today. It'll be a nice summary of our whole discussion about the stranger and Chumash. Now, if someone can help me, I want anyone have an English, Ruth, what English Hebrew Tanakh do you have in front of you?
An English Tanakh? Wait a minute, I can get one. Oh, I have a Koran.
Yeah, bring a Koran, and I want someone with an art scroll also.
I've got an art scroll.
Okay, so Shelley, you're in charge of art scroll.
Okay.
And Ruth, you're in charge of Koran.
Okay.
And anyone have a different translation with them?
Birnbaum.
You want Aryeh Kaplan?
Birnbaum is fine. Okay, good. Or Aryeh Kaplan is also fine. Okay. Now, because we're going to see how interesting how people translate the word ger today. It'll be a lot of fun.
Is it the new Koran or the old Koran?
Koran.
That's fine.
It's the new.
The Shivrei Luchos are together with the Luchos. Okay. Okay, so let's get to work. Let me share my screen. And where's my screen? My screen's here. Okay. Now, so today's topic is class number 7 in our Converse of Strangers, and I thought it was Gersha Shabbat or Goysha Shabbat. Who's the stranger? And like every good sugya, it's a machloket parshanim. It's an argument between the commentators. So just a real quick review. The main distinction we made, which I'm trying to prove all along, is that we have to distinguish between our obligation to the stranger and the obligation of the stranger. I think we proved that quite well, that whenever Chumash talks about our obligation of the Jewish people and how to treat a stranger, it can be ger, shebi sharecha, shebi kirbecha, shebi artzlechem, many ways. But whenever it's our obligation to a stranger, it doesn't make a difference if he's Jewish or not Jewish, whether he converted or not, ger toshav or ger tzedek. On the other hand, whenever the Torah has the obligation of the stranger, it's like 12 times or so, the obligation of the stranger, I try to prove he has to be Jewish because the Torah can't obligate, except the one time when he brings a korban, which includes even a non-Jewish one as well as a Jewish one for a technical reason. But in general, whenever there's an obligation or a prohibition, the punishment is always kareh, cut off from his people, and the phrase is almost always ger asher b'tochechem, in your midst, or ger and ezrach with the same status. Ger ezrach means a member of a tribe who has land rights in Yovel, and a ger who never have land rights in Yovel. So Yecheskel came and gave them back in Beit Sheni. Now, that was our main distinction. Now, one of the greatest test case is Shabbat. Why? Because is Shabbat our obligation to the stranger or his obligation? Meaning, everyone knows from Shabbat, from Kiddush, from the Ten Commandments, that the commandment to rest on Shabbat includes the stranger. So if the stranger is Jewish, why should he be any different? If he's not Jewish, why are we commanding him? So that's the question. Who is the ger in Shabbat? Is he a Jew or a non-Jew? Now, again, if he's Jewish, of course, why mention him? It's obvious here. If he's not Jewish, why should he have to? And therefore, is it his obligation or obligation? And before we go any farther, it'll make perfect sense. Why? Either way, if it's his obligation, then he has to be a ger tzedek. So if it's our obligation, then we have to explain why we're mentioning him. If it's our obligation, it can be any ger, and we have to give him a day of rest. Not that he can't do work, but he can't do work for us. You understand the difference? The Torah can't obligate the ger to keep Shabbat. In fact, Chazal say if a ger keeps Shabbat, he's punishable by death. I don't think we ever did that, but that's a thematic statement. But if the ger in the Ten Commandments is not Jewish, then it's not that he's obligated to keep Shabbat, but rather we're obligated to give him a day of rest. Now, so that was our turn. So let's read the Ten Commandments, Shabbat and the Ten Commandments, and see how interesting it is. Okay, now we're onto here. Okay, just if there's any, I'm not in my regular setting. I'm in a spot in the airport. So if there's any technical problem, let me know, because I'm not in my regular setup. So let's start. So Shabbat remembers, keep Shabbat. We work 6 days a week. This is a chiyuv d'oraita. We don't count it, but we're supposed to work 6 days a week. You know why? Because God works 6 days a week. And then B'yom hashvi Shabbat Lashem Elokecha. Can't do any work. Right? Who? You and your children. No, why would you think your children could? So therefore, most Parshim say your children who aren't bar mitzvah yet, who aren't obligated yet, and you're obligated to make sure they don't work for you, unless you have left the fridge open, left the light on, for some emergency, then you have your kid do it, etc. Okay. Ask your local rabbi. Okay. That's your workers, who they deserve a day of rest, like you. Now, you're a stranger. What do you mean yours? I mean, you're going. What's this possessive you're? Yeah, but probably of the community. But we showed you, ger shar is usually not Jewish, and therefore, if it's talking about a ger together with the evet emah, it makes more sense. It's our obligation to give him a day of rest, as opposed to that. Or it could be even easier. I'll give three possibilities. If he's Jewish, he has to keep Shabbat. Then why mention him? If he's not Jewish, either we have to give him a day of rest, or he can't work for us, like our servant and our maidservant, which is the Goy Shel Shabbat. In other words, he's saying he can't do this. We have to rest, and we can't let anyone else do our work. Right? Is it about, in a nutshell, is it about us or about him? If it's about us, he can't work for us. What he does, that's his problem. Or it's our obligation that he also deserves a day of rest, even though he's not Jewish. Okay? That's the ways of understanding it. Just a priori. We'll see the Parshanim in a minute. Let's read the 10 Commandments in Sefer Devarim. Oh, that's for the fun of it. Okay? Let's see the English here. This is the old JPS. What is the stranger called? A stranger. Okay. Shelley, read for me the art scroll on verse 9.
You, your son, your daughter, your slave, your maidservant, your animal, and your convert within your gates.
So how does he translate stranger? A convert. Or a ger tzedek. Now, what's the problem? Why mention him? Of course. Why wouldn't a convert be obligated to keep Shabbat? But he's following a midrash halacha that the Ramban is going to disagree with. Okay, let's hear who else has different. What's Koren say?
Oh, Koren. So this is Rabbi Sachs. This is Jonathan Sachs's Koren. He says the migrant.
Oh, and very interesting. The migrant. Doesn't say whether he's Jewish or not, right?
Yes, he does not say. He just says the migrant in your gates.
It would be interesting to see if he's consistent throughout the Devarim, throughout Chumash. Is ger always called a migrant, or does he, depending on the context? Okay. I wonder why Rabbi Sachs would mention the migrant. What's that have to do with the 21st century universal values? He's right on the mark. His translation is it's supposed to be meaningful. It's not necessarily. I went through it. It's not like the original Jerusalem Bible. It was very technical. That whatever the word meant in Hebrew, even if it just always was consistent. Here it depends on the setting and the meaning. It's consistent in the new translation. And I checked with Matthew with Koren that was their. I'm with Ronnie Ziegler. That was a cognitive decision to make it readable and meaningful, even though it's not exactly might not be exactly the precise meaning in Hebrew.
Although ger, that's the technical ger. He's a sojourner. He just moves around. He's not here.
A migrant is someone who's staying with you. That's more of a resident.
No. An immigrant is someone who stays with you, but a migrant is someone who moves around.
That I didn't know what it means. That's what it means in English, a migrant?
Yes, a migrant is someone who just moves around.
Okay, more like a gypsy kind of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So now let's take any other English translation we have out there? That's a good. So we've had migrant, convert, and stranger. Now everyone go now in your English to go to Sefer Devarim. If someone has a different English translation, I'd be more than happy to share with us. But let's go now to. Can't do this with I'll figure this out with my computer. Here we go. No. How do we get? Here we are. Okay. The 10 Commandments in Devarim. Shmor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadshol. 6 days work. So same thing. Yom HaShvi Shabbat L'Hashem Elokecha. Lo tasecho melacha atov v'itcha v'itecha v'techa b'amatecha v'shorcha v'chamocha v'chomtecha. Almost the same. V'gercha should be sharecha. It's almost the same wording, right?
Rabbi Sachs has a migrant also.
Okay.
Same migrant.
And Shelley, still a convert?
Yes, it's also a convert. By the way, when they say maidservant and slave, are those Jewish or not Jewish?
Good question. What would you think? If they're Jewish, why mention them? Why would they have to keep Shabbat? But on the other hand, the halacha is that if you have a servant, they have to be circumcised. But what's the status of a servant of a Evet Kanani? You know, that's a whole different concept in halacha. It's not clear it's very unclear in Chumash itself what it's talking about. Even though there's a lot of halacha discussions about the need to convert them. You have like a year to convert an Evet Kanani, otherwise you have to let go of them. No.
Would that be a woman too, since a woman wouldn't be circumcised?
Yeah, that's a question. How does a female become Jewish? We said we need tefillah, but that's complicated. Outside the scope of what we're doing. But the only answer I can give you is really complicated. Now, what's interesting here, which is key, is what's it say now? Remember, we had the two possibilities. Is it he can't work for us, or is it our obligation to him to give him the day off if he's not Jewish? Or is it he can't do our work for us? What's the reason here? Well, that gives it away, doesn't it? That means it's our obligation to the stranger, to the migrant, that he also deserves a day of rest. It's not just that he can't open the fridge for us and turn on the oven for us, etc. It's not that he can't do malacha for us, but rather it's our obligation to him. We have an obligation to the stranger that he also deserves a day of rest. Now, the question is that the same reason back in Shemot, or is that a different reason? But remember this phrase, because what's happening next? Followed by, remember, you were a slave in Egypt. Now that's key, because this is setting the stage for the rest of Sefer Dvarim. Because this phrase, remember you were a slave in Egypt, comes up numerous times in Sefer Dvarim, always is a motivator for a mitzvah about being kind to less fortunate people. We'll bring some examples later on. Now, if that's the case, now when we were slaves in Egypt, we weren't Egyptian, were we? We were migrants. We're totally migrant people. And therefore, if we earn the land and we're settling down, we're God's people, and we have a day of rest, it's our obligation to give our workers a day of rest as well. That's a fundamental statement about Judaism, and it's in the Ten Commandments. Now, if it's talking about someone who converted, why mention him? Of course, why wouldn't he be chayv in Shabbat? So we have to see why Chazal say that. Now, I want to talk about Kiddush Friday night. Kiddush Friday night, we have a toast for the Sabbath day, don't we? We welcome Shabbat. We thank God for giving us Shabbat. Remember? And then we raise a cup of wine. We're making a toast. We thank God for sending us Shabbat. And then we make a host and praise the Sabbath day. What's so great about it? What's so great about Shabbat? It's Zechel L'Maseh Bereshit, number 1. It's Tchila L'Mikrei Kodesh, number 2. It's Zechel L'Tzion number 3. 3 beautiful statements about Shabbat based on Sefer Shemot, the Ten Commandments, Zechel L'Maseh Bereshit, Parshat Emor and Vayikra. Tchila L'Mikrei Kodesh and Parshat Emor, before we get the Moadim. Remember? Before the Moadim start in Vayikra Chav Gimel. First we talk about Shabbat. It's Tchila. It's the introduction to Mikrei Kodesh and overrides them. That's from Vayikra Chav Gimel. And the Ten Commandments in Devarim is Zechel L'Tzat Mitzrayim. Now, the problem is people misunderstand that, and they think the reason we keep Shabbat is to remember the Exodus. It doesn't say that in the Ten Commandments. What's it say? We have to keep Shabbat so our workers get a day of rest, followed by remember you were a slave in Egypt. I think it's much deeper. It's remembering why God put you into Egypt to take you out of Egypt. It's not remembering that God saved you. I don't keep Shabbat to remember that I was stuck and God saved me. I have to remember Shabbat. God gave us Shabbat so we remember how to treat others. I have to keep Shabbat. I remember Shabbat. The reason why God put me into Egypt and made me suffer in Egypt is so that when I become sovereign and I become powerful, I give my workers a day of rest. That's a very different, that's not saying thank you, that's acting thank you. That's a fundamental difference of understanding what Shabbat is about. And when I think about it in Shabbat, it's about thanking God for, he gave me this day of rest, or reminding myself that the reason why God gave me a day of rest is because I have to make sure in my life I give others a day of rest. Basically, it's about me or it's about others. Again, that's something really fundamental. Now, I want to highlight that when they compare the, in Parshat Mishpatim, I want to show you something interesting. I have to stop my share for a second and go to regular Chumash. Let me check the chat real fast. Okay. Migrants move around and they decide what work for you. I think they had some nice examples of that in Qatar, right? When they're building the stadiums. And that's a great example of what Chumash is despising. To the point if someone really wanted to be Machmir, he wouldn't even watch, in protest, he wouldn't even watch the soccer games. But no one would be Machmir that much, unless they don't like soccer. Where are we? Okay, I'm going to stop my share here, open up a Chumash too, and I want all of my English translations open also. We're going to open up a Chumash, not to my WhatsApp. You don't want my WhatsApp, you want my Tanakh. There we go. We need Sefer Shmot to Exodus. Everyone sees Exodus now? Okay. Chapter 23, the laws of Parshat Mishpatim. Remember, 3 chapters of Parshat Mishpatim after the 10 Commandments. Chapter 23, mostly laws about good behavior, returning lost items, okay, not taking bribes, shochad, and finally, don't oppress a stranger, and you know what it feels like to be a stranger. You were strangers in Egypt. These are all fundamental psukim that come right after the 10 Commandments. But everything till here was primarily between man and his fellow man. Okay? Most of Parshat Mishpatim is that. And now we have a slow transition to the final law of Sholosh Regalim, about 3 times a year kissing God. But watch this transition from laws between man and man to laws between man and God. The 6 years work your land and gather your produce. The 7th year, the Shemitah year, leave the land fallow, right? It sounds like the reason for Shemitah now is not to remember that it's not like Shabbat. It's just like Shabbat, isn't it? Just like Shabbat, is it you need a day of rest or your workers need a day of rest? Is Shemitah, is Shabbat, Beinam Lamakom, Beinam Chavero? We had the 2 Dibrot, in Shmot and Dvarim. Shemitah also, Shemitah in Vayikra is Shabbat Lashem, and here Shemitah is what? So the poor people will take that year, and then leftovers let the animals eat. Okay, and the same thing for your vineyard and for your olives. Okay. So we have Shemitah, which is Beinam Lamakom with an element of Beinam Chavero. That's Shabbat. Why do we have to rest on Shabbat? Here, it's just like the 10, even though this is Shmot, this is just like the 10 Commandments and Dvarim. So don't tell me 2 authors. I don't care what the Bible critics tell you. Okay? Why? Leman yonuach shorcha v'chamarecha v'nafesh ben amatecha v'hager. Who needs a day of rest? You have to rest, so your workers have a day of rest. Okay? Okay. Let's look here. Here it's the stranger, and the stranger. The stranger, even though it says, okay, the stranger. Okay, take it away, Ruth. What's Rabbi Sachs say here?
He says the stranger.
Okay, not the migrant.
Not the migrant, just stranger.
Okay, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You wouldn't have expected that if it's the same. It's the same reason. That's surprising. Okay, Shelley.
Our scroll says sojourner instead of convert. They say sojourner.
Yeah. You know why? Because Chazal say this is a ger toshav. We'll see Ramban in a minute. Ramban's going to argue. Okay. Any other translations out there? Who else had a translation? I mean, those are the possibilities. I would have expected migrant, but again, what did Rabbi Sachs say?
Yes, stranger.
A stranger. That's right.
Not a migrant. Not a.
Okay. And our scroll says the what do you call it? The
sojourner.
Sojourner. Okay, which is not Jewish. Okay. Then that's the last law that takes us right into Sholosh Regalim. Now, that's what I want to show you the psukim inside, but the whole context here is Beinam L'Chavero. So it makes sense is how we treat. Now, what was right beforehand? Oh, let's go back in your English translations. V'ger lo tilchatz. What's our scroll say? Shelley? Verse 9. V'ger lo tilchatz.
Let me just find it.
Same
stranger.
Chapter.
Stranger.
He said stranger. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Ruth?
Stranger. Also stranger.
Oh, so the same gear here is the same gear here. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see what he says in chapter 22, verse 9. I mean, 22:20. Look at 22:20. What did they say there?
Stranger.
Stranger.
Also stranger. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they're consistent. That's good. Now remember, in Hebrew, it's always the same word, but English translations have to try to translate it based on the context. Art school will always follow Chazal, which is following Rashi, which is following Chazal. So now we're ready for Ramban on the Ten Commandments. And share my screen now and open up our source sheet. Okay. So when we have now Shabbat, there's two possibilities to consider. Okay. Is the stranger on Shabbat the Ger Tzedek or the Ger Toshav? Now, if it's a Ger Tzedek, why mention him at all? That's what we said before. Why should it be any other Jew? Okay. And if it's a Ger Toshav, that someone who hasn't converted, so it's a migrant, because someone that worshiping idols, okay? Can the Torah forbid him to work, right? Is it his obligation, right? Or that he not work for us, or that we're obligated to give him a day of rest? Everything we talked about before. Now, I want to first explain why it can't be a convert. Why? Because later in Sefer Shmot, when we finish the Mishkan, what are we told? God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "Vatad ber b'Yisrael v'mem achashav tishmoru, ki oti beni u'benechem v'dat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem." What is Shabbat? Shabbat is an oath brit. Remember oti lo me'ad beni u'beni? Ask Eben Ezra. Eben Ezra? Kiyashma Shabbat. Okay, yeah, it's Eben Abraham. It's Eben Ezra. Abraham. But Eben Ezra understood that Shabbat is an oath brit based on these psukim. Okay, why? Shabbat is not just a reminder that God created, but it's our reminder. It's a reminder in the realm of time, just like the Mishkan. We just finished the laws of the Mishkan in chapter 31. The Mishkan is a reminder in the realm of space of our connection to God of Har Sinai. Shabbat is a reminder in the realm of time of our commitment to be God's people at Har Sinai, followed by a chiyuv of karet if you don't keep it. The first chiyuv of karet for Shabbat is here. Now, why am I saying it's our reminder of Har Sinai? L'dat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. It's an oath brit, it's an oath ben yubein, which is a wording of a covenant. To know ani Hashem mekadishchem, that's exactly Brit Sinai, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What's Brit Sinai say? Sorry here. Oh, can't get this thing working. Reach down, maybe here. Okay. Batem shmo tishmo v'kodesh batem et briti. Batem shmo mekalvi. Batem tuli ma'mechet kodim v'goy kadosh. Ani Hashem mekadishchem. That's Brit Sinai. Batem tuli ma'mechet kodim v'goy kadosh. So that's why it doesn't make any sense that a goy would be obligated to keep Shabbat, because Shabbat is an oath brit for us. Therefore, it makes much more sense. Shabbat is a yeah. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. The oath brit. Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to learn Ramban. A beautiful Ramban on this pasuk. Let me get my screen down. There we go. I made Ramban big, nice letters. I couldn't find Ramban, but if anyone knows a Ramban online that has nikud, please let me know. That has vowels. I can read it, but for people, I'd like to know on the source sheet. It would be easier for source sheet. I couldn't find any source sheet. Like Rashi with nikud, you find lots of. It's hard to find Ramban with nikud. Okay. V'gercha shebisharecha al derech hapshat. Okay. It's probably what? Ger shar. Okay. Why say ger shar? Because ger shebisharecha. It says ger shar. Okay. The olam hu ger toshav. Shabo logur b'shari irenu. We call migrant. But a ger toshav is not a convert, non-Jewish. Okay. V'kibel av sheva mitzvah ben noach. He's not an idol worshiper. He's not a bad influence. He's just a resident. He's coming to take care of our grandparents. Someone comes from the Philippines, from Sri Lanka. And they help us out. And what happens if they go to church on Sundays? So what paskin that Christianity is still monotheism, okay?
Yeah.
If we can make if they do the work that we don't want to do. Okay. That's what we call in Lashon Chachamim. A ger who's allowed, who we feed nevelos to, but we gift it to him. No, remember the pasuk about nevela that proved that sometimes the ger is not Jewish? That we gift him a nevela. So ger achal nevelot is the ger shar, which is lashon and dvarim. Now, if that's dvarim, it makes sense that the introductory pasuk in dvarim about Shabbat is talking about a ger who's not Jewish. Okay. But that therefore it doesn't make any sense, Ramban saying, that this mitzvah is about a ger tzedek, right? Okay. Remember we said, what is the lashon of a convert? Ezrach and ger have the same obligation. So we don't say on Shabbat, don't do any work, the Ezrach and the ger. It says you can't do work, and the ger b'sharecha, you don't let him do work for you. Got it? Avolanu, see what he's saying here? That's what I'm saying. Avolanu yitzaveh shulei asem malacha l'tzorchenu. Tani v'abema. This is not his obligation. It's not obligation on him because he's not Jewish. It's our obligation that he can't work for us. He's taking on this is on Shmuel. The Devarim is even more. That's our obligation for him, and that's going to be the one in Mishpatim as well. Got it? V'hu batzmo ein alav zot mitzvah. He's not commanded to keep Shabbat. It's our obligation to him, not his obligation to us, to himself. Okay? V'osem melacha latzmo b'Shabbat. Is that perfect, Ramban? Ramban's right on the mark. Everything we've been talking about, right there. Okay. How about the pasuk in Shemot Chav Gimel that we read? Who's that talking about? Okay. Who ger tzedek? Which is strange. He says that's talking about a convert. But why? Why need to mention it? Now, I understand the Ramban on the Ten Commandments makes sense, but what's causing him to say that the ger in Parshat Mishpatim is talking about a ger tzedek? Why can't it be a ger toshav as well? And for an additional reason, to highlight the reason we have in Devarim, that he needs a day of rest. I'm really surprised the Rambam reaches that conclusion. Okay. So he's saying that it's a principle that everyone has the same status under the law. He's saying again that the ger, it goes like you were saying, because later on he's chayv correct, remember? So he's saying even though he's a ger and he converted, he has the same obligations as we have. Maybe to be inclusive, okay? We talked about that. Or remember, and the ger v'ezrach ba'aretz coming together. So that's always someone who converted, which we saw the same thing. Now, Avo matzanu l'Rabbeinu, that's Art Scroll. It's finally Chazal, and which came first, and then Mechilta came first. They said in the Ten Commandments, the ger shebisharecha is a ger tzedek. Who chayv kamonu b'shvita? He's chayv in Shabbat like we are. The nefesh ben tefach ger, the rabot ger toshav ha'arel. Okay, he flips it around. Then Rabban saying the opposite. Now, why are they so set on saying that each one is different? I'll explain to you why. Once it says gercha, your ger, and the other is hager. Now, once ger shar, once ger b'sharecha, the gercha should be sharecha. The other is the ger lo toneh, the hager, stam ger. So basically, he's taking what I call, we say, our Hebrewish. Remember in Hebrewish, a ger is a convert? Oh, he's a ger, it's a convert. So they're understanding that a ger can't be the same as ger shebisharecha. So Ramban is saying ger shebisharecha is always a ger toshav, and therefore some ger is a convert. And that's pretty much what Chazal do all through it. Therefore, raftem at the ger, stam ger they say is a convert or a proselyte, and ger shebisharecha is the non-Jew. And that's how they'll make the distinction. We came up with a different conclusion in our study, but that's what's behind this. Even though in my opinion it doesn't make sense, because this fits the reason for Devarim that everyone needs a day of rest. Okay. So he quotes what do you call it? The Rabot ger toshav sharev tzonam shiu hamuzar tchilat. And therefore, first we warn the ger who's converted, ger nimol in the Ten Commandments, shechayv kamonu. And the second pasuk in Mishpatim is the Rabot a ger who's not Jewish. Okay. Which is really not nice. Okay. Binafesh ben amatech hager. L'man yaduach shorcha v'chamorecha. He's saying he's in the same group as animals, which is what Shamar Laman Yanu Shorcha v'Chamrecha v'Nabin B'Teflager Tivanu b'Shvitat Kulam b'Shaveh. No one can work for us. Okay, Shuli Yesu Lanu. They shouldn't do work for us. Okay, but that's why he says this one is a ger shar. That's why they say that the one here is a ger shar. This is that they can't work for us. Just like your animal can't work for us, He's explaining why Chazal say this is that the ger here, the ger in Mishpatim, is it's not Jewish. Because just like they can't work for us. That's the main thing they were saying.
Rabbi,
Yes?
if you have to give the gift to shop a day off, and the gate to since the gate to shop is not obligated on Shabbat. If the gate to shop says, I'd rather have Sunday off.
Oh, that's a good question. Whether no, it's not. The other thing is if it says he needs a day of rest, I can give a different day of rest. Let him work for me on Shabbos. I'll give him on Sunday. That's a good idea. We can write a letter to the editor. That's a good. I mean, but I'm saying that's a really good idea, and that's what I mean. That he gives a day of rest, but let him rest on a different day. Another day. Anyway, I have to go. I have to leave in 5 minutes to my flight, so I'm gonna have to hold off questions now for now, and I just got to finish up. I have 5 minutes to finish up. Okay, and I'll take questions on email or on chat, or I'll continue them next week if you want. But I have 6 minutes to take the flight. Okay. So one last thing is that when I compare the 10 Commandments in Devarim and Shemot, the commandment's the same, the reason's different. This is Shabbat to remember that God created, right? And here's to remember that you have to give your workers a day of rest, followed by the theme of remember you were a slave in Egypt. I just want to show you that this reason in 10 Commandments is not just stam, it's the introduction. Remember, chapter 5 is the beginning of the speech that begins a whole set of laws of Sefer Devarim, and this becomes a refrain and the theme through Sefer Devarim, which is all about social justice and about the ger and the eved who have to take care of. And all through Devarim, that same phrase, remember you were a slave in Egypt. Same thing when you're harvesting your field, remember you were a slave in Egypt. Emulating God. We talked about this. So for the fun of it, look at the English here in Devarim chapter 10. One last thing, and then we'll finish with this. Look at the English. I want all my English translations about loving the stranger. Remember, God does bishpat yatom v'almana and lets strangers give a stranger. You have to, because you were strangers in Egypt. We weren't converts in Egypt. We were migrants in Egypt. So look at the English here. Love the stranger, because you were strangers in Egypt. Shelley, what's our scroll say?
Proselyte.
Proselyte.
Rabbi Sachs has the stranger.
The stranger, okay.
What was Art Scroll?
Our scroll is a convert. The proselyte is a convert. Is that amazing? Right? Because he holds that our loving the ger, only a convert you have to love. You're not have to love a stranger. And Rav Sachs holds every stranger you have to love. That's why English translations are super important to make sure you always look at the source. But it's a thing. And every translator has a problem, has a dilemma, what to do. Now, what do you call it? Now, I want to take it one step farther. We have to remember we were slaves in Egypt. Remember, once a year, right? And then don't eat chametz with it. Remember? Why do we go crazy once a year? The yearly celebration we talked about is to emphasize the daily memory. The daily memory shapes our life. Remember, the Pesach or Chag HaMatzot is a what do you call it? Is a booster shot. It's a booster shot for that idea. And then finally we have 7 weeks, counting 7 weeks. Shiva Shavuot Tispor Lach Mecho Chamesh Bakama. Remember Shavuot. And that's for the fun of it. Let's look at the translation of Simchat Yom Tov. Okay. Remember Samachta B'Chagecha in chapter 16. Who has to be happy? The Ger Yotom and Amana. Okay. Okay. Rabbi Sachs says what?
Now this is the migrant.
Now it's the migrant. Okay, that's cool. Okay, that's a migrant. Okay.
Proselyte.
And our scroll say the proselyte. Okay. Is that tremendous? Right? The Art Scroll translation, it's got to be a convert. You have to be in Simchat Yom Tov. And Rabbi Sachs says you include even a non-Jew, even a migrant, any migrant. Okay. I'm sure it would be the same thing for Sukkot. Okay. So what translation you use is very important. And now the idea that memory shapes your behavior. One last thing in Dvarim, remember what God did to Miriam, is not to remember Lashon Hara about Miriam. Remember? It's remembering not to speak Lashon Hara. Everyone remembers that, right? I'm saying memory is a key theme in Sefer Dvarim. Remember what God did to Miriam is a big thing. Anyway, I have to leave now early today, so we'll stop here. But thank you so much. And next week, Mirsa back home. We have a 2-part Hanukkah series starting next week. And I'll listen to Benny's share to make sure I won't do the same thing. I'm sure it'll be different, but I'll make sure it won't overlap. Okay, everyone have a good week. And sorry after.
Thank you, Nestiya Tova.
Okay, bye-bye.
Tova.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Marty, I'll get the question later, Marty, okay? Bye-bye. I'll go look it up.